I would point to as a catalyst and where we could begin is when China banned Bitcoin mining. It caused a lot of Bitcoin mining to move to the United States, and that caused it to get on the radar of Elizabeth Warren and other groups that are anti-Bitcoin. We really emphasized in all of our conversations with policymakers and all of our communications with the public, highlighting the value of having a decentralized monetary system, and that the only way to achieve that value and to secure it is with Bitcoin mining. 2 years ago, they were saying, oh, we don't like Bitcoin mining. Now they're saying, we love Bitcoin. Let's buy Bitcoin. Ultimately, if we were to look at it objectively, that's what they should do, is that the Federal Reserve should just create lots of dollars and buy up Bitcoin and build up a Bitcoin reserve that way. You know, there's confusion about Bitcoin versus crypto. This is the kind of confusion that can only be addressed by a strategic Bitcoin reserve, because it forces that conversation. This is how things begin, is they start small.
Give us an overview for people that don't know you, like what are you doing in Bitcoin, especially also with the focus on nation states?
Yeah, absolutely. So just by way of background, I got really interested in Bitcoin because I was very interested in open source software. So I was installing Linux on my parents' computers in high school. And I was also interested in monetary economics. And within that, the Austrian School of Economics that really emphasized sound money and gold and silver and 100% reserve banking. So when I discovered Bitcoin at the end of 2012, it was at the intersection of these two interests of open source and sound money. So I immediately became very obsessed with it and have been researching it since and writing about it and speaking about it. Now, over the years, I've had different roles within the industry. So I worked at BitPay, which is a Bitcoin payment processing company. I worked at Kraken, which is a large exchange. And most recently, I worked at Riot Platforms, which is a publicly traded Bitcoin miner here in the US, which I just left earlier this month. So now I'm really just focused on Bitcoin education for all of the different kinds of demographics that are getting interested more so in Bitcoin now than in the past. And in that regard, it has really exceeded all of my expectations that we now have lots of government officials who are interested in Bitcoin in a positive manner rather than in a negative manner like they have been in the past. So, you know, my role at Riot was really pushing back against Elizabeth Warren that was, you know, she's a senator from Massachusetts who was very antagonistic towards Bitcoin mining for what she described as environmental reasons, although, you know, she had her other reasons for that as well. But now that that kind of skeptical anti-Bitcoin voice has been denied airspace within politics, there's really a lot of room for education for Bitcoin in a positive direction of explaining what its value is, why so many voters are interested in it and are, you know, want to vote for candidates who are pro-Bitcoin, and then what pro-Bitcoin policy looks like beyond just the do no harm of looking at, okay, how can we actually help Bitcoin? How can we advance this movement? And in particular with strategic Bitcoin reserves.
That's super interesting. So you have a lot of, actually a lot of insights of like major exchange with Kraken, major miner and all the things that you've done. That's super interesting. For how long are you already doing, working in Bitcoin? That seems like already some years that you've done.
Yeah, it's been 12 years now. And so, wow. I still feel like, we're very early. So, you know, I still have a lot of enthusiasm because we haven't accomplished the mission. And when I first was telling my now wife about Bitcoin back in 2013, I told her, hey, look, next year there's not going to be a financial system anymore. It's all going to be replaced by Bitcoin. And so I had this like, hey, it's about to happen. type mentality. And then with every year that went by, I realized that I was wrong about that. That it's going to take many years, if not decades, in order to really achieve what we would call hyper-Bitcoinization, of bringing the whole world on the Bitcoin standard and really changing people's thinking about it.
So it's still now, like, it's already a decade. So you're still thinking like it will still take like decades from now to get this hyper Bitcoinization. By the way, I agree. I also thought it will go faster and faster, and now it's happening, and it's like it takes longer.
Yeah, I think that the crucial difference between Bitcoin as a technology and iPhones as a technology, for example, is that so as a currency, it's entirely momentum driven. So there's nothing really it's not about the utility of it. It's about what was its price yesterday. And so when the Bitcoin price is going up, that attracts a lot of adoption. And then that causes the Bitcoin price to go up. So that's the momentum aspect of Bitcoin adoption. And then eventually you get a point where people are way over leveraged and there's no more net new adoption. And in fact, you have disadoption. So what happens is that the OGs who bought at $10, they sell at $1,000 or they sell at $10,000 so that they can buy a Lambo or pay for their kids' college or pay off their parents' mortgage or donate to a charity, right? So there's lots of reasons for why the wealth effect causes older adopters to sell their Bitcoin and hand the baton on to the next generation. But then that causes the crash, right? And then when the Bitcoin price is going down, that actually pushes adoption away, right? Because who wants to adopt something that's going down in value? And until you finally reach the bottom of the bear market, and then the cycle starts all over again. Now, if you compare that to, for example, the iPhone, you don't have that phenomenon of people buying and hoarding iPhones because they think the value of the iPhone is going to go up and then selling their iPhones at the top, right? So it's a completely different dynamic in a monetary technology adoption than in a normal utility technology adoption.
That's an interesting point. I never thought about that, actually, the cycle difference, because we see all those technology trends and how fast they're going, like electricity, the internet, smartphones, and all those things, and they tend to get far quicker. But obviously, Bitcoin is a whole nother beast, and there's also a huge network effect in the fiat currencies. How big of a thing is that, actually, that people have the network effect within fiat and kind of that slowing down adoption for Bitcoin even?
So I think that's particularly a problem or a challenge for Bitcoin payments. So if we look, for example, at cards, credit cards and debit cards, they started in the 1950s. They did not go mainstream until the 2000s. So for 50 years, they slowly built up network effect, and it was a better technology than checks or than cash even, right? Controversial, but better technology. And so now there's actually, if you look at the Visa and MasterCard networks, there's government regulations about how much money they can charge because they are essentially natural monopolies because of their network effects on payments. So I think that is, if we look at Lightning or Bitcoin transactions, I do think that the payments story will happen. It's just going to happen perhaps even more slowly than the store of value adoption of Bitcoin. Now, the store of value adoption, I think the network effects there are a lot easier because you can actually join the Bitcoin network almost in isolation, right? Nobody else in your neighborhood has to adopt Bitcoin as a store of value for you to do that. You just have to find other people on the internet who are also interested in adopting that as a store of value, and then have exchanges where you can actually be able to access liquidity into your local currency so that you're not dependent on having a local network.
Absolutely, yeah. Because you need, if you want to be on a Bitcoin standard and get payments, you need an employer who pays you, or have some workaround where you get fiat payment. But that's the same as buying for me. That's not really getting Bitcoin. That's very true. one question I wanted to go in a different route, but it's very interesting. Why do you think it's so perfectly aligned, those cycles with like buying and selling, with that mining cycle, and with this 4-year cycle of like 3 years up and 1 year down, and like every year there's this talk of super cycles and we're breaking it finally, but it seems like it's just like a perfect working machine and it's never breaking.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that historically we could argue that the halvings have had a triggering effect, just supply and demand, right? That we cut supply in half of new coins coming onto the market, and then that kind of begins the cycle. And then if that's the case going forward, as the halvings become a smaller and smaller percentage of Bitcoin's total supply, we could expect that trend to break down. And so if we look at other markets tend to have longer cycles, like 8 to 12 years. If you look at the stock market and other things like that. So maybe it'll get longer, but it might also just stay short because of human psychology. So humans don't change, right? So there might be something about literally our brains and that 4-year kind of 3 years and 1 year, kind of it takes time to heal the brain, or to cause another bullish. We're social animals, so we end up in having this herd mentality where we all want to do everything at the same time. One of my first jobs, I worked at a supermarket, and there was an interesting phenomenon that people would come into the store about evenly spread over time, but people would check out from the store in waves. And it's because they would notice somebody else checking out and they would think, oh, it's time for me to go too. And then they would go check out. And so you would need to have, people come to help check out because of these waves, even though people came into the store regularly. And so we're very social animals, and that's a good thing, right? We should love our neighbors, but it also causes interesting financial phenomena.
I never. That's so true. Like there's literally when I go to a supermarket, because like I work, like I don't have times where I work, so I usually tend to go to a supermarket if it's really empty. So usually I'm the first one to go there, and then I have to wait for someone to come there, because like there's literally almost nobody else in the supermarket at that time. But when I go later or earlier, I notice that you just come in, and sometimes you're lucky and there's like nobody there, and sometimes there's like a huge line. But there's never a line when they're coming in. So it's super interesting. I never thought about. So you actually observed that. That's an interesting thing, and I never thought about that. Maybe let's come now to the nation state thing. There's so much happening, and maybe it would be actually interesting to hear, because you worked at Riot and you kind of got the bad side of that there in the backlash also. How has, in the United States now, and I think 50% around of the audience is also from the United States, how has Bitcoin developed in the past 4 years or like 3 years, whatever time frame you want to pick, in the United States in terms of Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I think the one event that I would point to as a catalyst and where we could begin is when China banned Bitcoin mining. So when they did that, it caused a lot of Bitcoin mining to move to the United States. And that caused it to get on the radar of Elizabeth Warren and other groups that are anti-Bitcoin. Also, if we look at the litigation against Ripple and XRP, I think that also caused that ecosystem to invest resources into making environmental arguments against Bitcoin in order to make XRP look environmentally friendly, and thus, the kind of cryptocurrency that the government should not be prosecuting. So those two factors led to a big political push against Bitcoin miners here. And so that's why Riot hired me to come in and help with setting up a public policy practice. So first thing I did when I joined was to go and hire a head of public policy in DC, Brian Morgenstern, who's done a fantastic job. Before joining Riot, he was actually working at the previous Trump administration in the White House and at the U.S. Treasury. And so he became orange-pilled because of the Canadian trucker protests. He realized, just like a lot of us did, that the banking system could be weaponized and that you would want to have something that is a backup, an alternative that is decentralized, that cannot be controlled by corporations and by governments. So in any case, he did an excellent job of developing relationships with policymakers, while, on the research side, I would provide kind of the, let's say, the thinking behind the arguments that we should be making. And it was a very multifaceted approach, because it wasn't just at the federal level that we had pushback, but also at the state level that there were concerns about Bitcoin mining, even here in Texas among policymakers. So the two big things happened. One is that the New York Times wrote an article highlighting our alleged carbon emissions. So they were trying to make the argument that we were responsible for CO2 emissions, which doesn't really make any sense in any other context. So, for example, if we look at the Montreal Accord for the ozone layer, or the ozone layer was getting a hole in it because of CFCs. And so the Montreal Accord said, okay, no more direct emission of CFCs. And they banned CFCs. And now the ozone layer is fixed. Now there's no hole. And so that actually worked. They decided to take a very different approach with carbon emissions, of saying, we're not interested so much in the direct carbon emissions. We're interested in the indirect carbon emissions. So who is consuming electricity that is causing a natural gas plant to turn on, which doesn't make any sense, because you're not actually solving the problem. You're just trying to politicize different industries. I went out to our facility in Rockdale with a CO2 meter and made a bit of a funny video for the New York Times, showing that we didn't have any carbon emissions at our Bitcoin mining facility. We're fully electrified. And so it was kind of a red herring. Now, when they posted the New York Times article on Twitter, the company replied with that video, and something amazing happened, which is that we were able to ratio the video. So we had more likes, more retweets, more views on the video than they did on their in-depth, quote unquote, investigative reporting. So it really transformed the field of crisis communication, first of all, because people always thought, oh, journalists, we got to be afraid of journalists. No, we shouldn't be afraid of journalists. We should make fun of journalists. We should ridicule them, because, when they write things that are completely idiotic, that needs to be called out. People understand the truth. We should speak the truth. So that's one. And then second, on Bitcoin mining, we should stop explaining. In politics, there's a very important saying: if you are explaining, you are losing, right? So if you're explaining, oh, actually, Bitcoin mining is 50% renewable because we're using wind and solar, and you've already lost the argument. So instead, what we did is make them explain, oh, actually, we're not talking about direct emissions of carbon. We're talking about indirect emissions, which come through the electrical grid. And so, it really changed the approach that we have in terms of communicating about Bitcoin mining, to be less defensive and more offensive. That this is just like an electric car. This is an electric computer. It's not a gas powered, computer. So that was one. And two was, I think, perhaps even more important, talking about the value of Bitcoin, because ultimately, if Bitcoin has zero value and it's just beanie babies and tulips, then any amount of resource consumption for Bitcoin is wasteful. So even if it's fine for the environment, it's still a waste of resources to be Bitcoin mining. if Bitcoin has no value. And so we really emphasized in all of our conversations with policymakers and all of our communications with the public, highlighting the value of having a decentralized monetary system. And that the only way to achieve that value and to secure it is with Bitcoin mining. So I think that we were so effective in doing that that we actually persuaded politicians that they should buy Bitcoin. And so we were more successful than we could have ever dreamed of. And we moved the Overton window so far in a pro Bitcoin direction that then in July of last year, Trump announced we're going to have a national stockpile of Bitcoin. And he's followed through on that campaign promise. So I think going forward, now at the state level in Texas, also the case that the politicians that were concerned about Bitcoin mining last cycle, because the Texas legislature meets every 2 years, 2 years ago, they were saying, oh, we don't like Bitcoin mining. Now they're saying, we love Bitcoin. Let's buy Bitcoin. And so they're setting up a Texas strategic reserve of Bitcoin. And I think that's actually, that bill is going to pass is my current assessment of it. It has passed the state Senate. I had the honor of going to the state Senate and testifying in favor of the bill to kind of explain why I think it's a good idea. So I think that it's really, if we were to point to why Bitcoin has become so successful in U.S. politics, it's really because Elizabeth Warren decided to attack it. It was anti-fragile.
That I love the ending here, because like you make it stronger with every attack, because the attack has a response, and the response is then it makes it better. Is just quickly, is the Elizabeth Warren and the other groups that are against Bitcoin, is that just because, as you said, funded by Ripple, or is there some other agenda they have, or are they actually worried about the environment?
So I think the root of it is that they subscribe to an ideology called chartalism. So chartalism says that the state should have a monopoly on the issuance of currency. And that way the state can control the economy. So I think that's the root of it. Now, they know that they cannot go and make that argument in public because it sounds bad. It's just, it sounds awful. And it's not popular at all. In fact, it's really unpopular. So they have to find other indirect critiques of Bitcoin, of the environment, of terrorism, criminals using it, drugs, all these things, because they can't make the intellectually honest argument that they want power and control over others.
It's a good one. Yeah. It's also like, it's just like if no, let's not go there. But it's super interesting when you see the political movement, and if they are against it or for it, and why that. How do you look actually outside of the state, especially now in the EU? I'm interested in that because I live here, unfortunately. But how do you look at other states? Are they in the same process where they are right now, where maybe America was 2021, 2022, and they're just lagging behind? Or is there something fundamental different? Do you see also maybe some positive trends towards that in other countries like EU?
Perhaps. I think that they are in a very different frame of mind, in the sense that here in the United States, if we look within the Democrat Party here, Elizabeth Warren is her perspective on Bitcoin is in the minority in the Democratic Party. So she's not reflective of the left in the United States. On the other hand, in Europe, I do think that she is reflective of even the center and the left, and some elements of the right as well. Because on the right in Europe, I think that once we go far enough on the right, you have people who do want to have monetary sovereignty and who do reject the idea of having a global currency like Bitcoin. They would rather have a national currency that they control. So I think that it's a much more difficult situation in Europe in many regards. I'm hopeful that by setting a positive example and showing to the rest of the world the amount of prosperity that Bitcoin brings, that will cause changes in people's mentality. But I'm not optimistic on Europe. My family left France when I was young, and so maybe that shapes my cynicism on Europe. But I hope for the best.
I live in Europe, and I agree with you. So take it as you want.
Yeah.
What is the current state in America right now? We had the strategic Bitcoin reserve. We had that crypto meeting where Seyr was, but unfortunately did not speak. We have maybe I can quickly show you. You're well aware of that side probably of Julian who made that overlooks side where you can see the bills. I think that's a great side of like seeing what's really going on, how many states actually have already bills and where they are. I don't know how accurate this currently is and how updated. But what is kind of the current state of America, and then maybe later, what do you expect for it to come in this year?
So I think that it's always going to take longer than we want it to, but that it is on a positive trajectory. The challenge, I think, at the federal level is that the federal government is in financial trouble, right? That it has massive deficits. Doge is trying to find places to cut spending, and so they have to find creative ways of acquiring Bitcoin, if that's the plan for growing the strategic reserve, which I think it is. So there's some interesting proposals around there. One proposal that I put forward was to sell gold. That we have all this gold in Fort Knox, supposedly, and the price of gold is reaching record highs nowadays. And so it would make sense to sell gold and to buy Bitcoin. Another idea, which is really interesting, that I've heard from a number of different people now, and was presented by Andrew Hans in DC last week, was issuing what are called bit bonds, Bitcoin-backed bonds, where some percentage of the bond is backed by Bitcoin, and so the bondholder gets a hybrid instrument that combines the principal protection of a traditional bond with some upside potential for the Bitcoin price, and that would actually lower the interest expense for the U.S., so it would save money, while also providing for more Bitcoin ownership, wider Bitcoin ownership for people who think that Bitcoin is too volatile, right? Which is, I think, a lot of people when we look at the survey data.
It's super interesting of like how can they acquire Bitcoin without buying it? I mean, it's also like they have the money printer, so kind of.
Yeah, that's true, and I think that ultimately, if we were to look at it objectively, that's what they should do. Is that the Federal Reserve should just create lots of dollars and buy up Bitcoin and build up a Bitcoin reserve that way. Politically, that is challenging because that is seen as inflationary, which I don't think it would be inflationary if we kind of think through the mechanics of it. But right now, it doesn't seem like the Overton window is there yet. We have to keep pushing it, right?
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there. And of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange. But if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin way. The Bitcoin way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there. It seems so interesting. I've searched it, but I couldn't find it. There's I mean, maybe it's just Twitter, but there's some things where like Jason Laurie changed his profile picture. Michael Saylor said big things are coming. And there's a lot of like those collections. And sometimes it's more noise around nothing. Do you know anything? Do you expect anything that is, because I think a lot of people are kind of, I don't know if disappointed, but a lot of people thought there's more coming, like Trump is coming into office and like big things are coming in, like strategic Bitcoin reserve, and it makes a boom and the price goes up and everything is there. So in that regard, maybe some are, I don't know, like disappointed from what actually happened.
Yeah, well, to them, I would say enjoy the journey. It's the friends we make along the way, because this is, I think, going to take a significant amount of time, and that we're going to continue to have hype. We're going to continue to have, big things are coming, and then nothing comes, and that then eventually there will be a week where everything changes, right? So it's always there's periods of acceleration. I think that's where I encourage people to explore meditation, spirituality, so that they can kind of detach from the world. This is a fallen world. It's very flawed. And so people have to go to church.
I love that. I throw in there one more recommendation. Long walks are amazing. Yes. Like in the sun, long walks, like 1 hour, 2 hour walks, get some touch grass. One thing that's also always interesting, because like we have those political cycles with 4 years and Trump coming in. Before it was like a little bit more hostile with the Biden administration. How deep is that pro Bitcoin stance on a federal level, or maybe also on a state level, and how much is depending on Trump administration?
I don't think that any Democrats or any politicians in the United States will be able to win if they are not pro Bitcoin at a national level. So I don't think that it's reversible at this point. So on the left, it's a huge problem, because right now it seems like leadership is being taken by folks who like AOC are Bitcoin skeptics. When if they want to win, what they need is politicians like Ro Khanna, who is a Democrat from Silicon Valley, who's pro-Bitcoin. And so they need that kind of leadership, but it doesn't seem like that's the direction the Democratic Party is going in. I think it's a huge problem. I think that the Democratic Party, well, so what I'll start off with, first of all, so I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, but I also think that it's good to have competition. It's good to have a marketplace of ideas. It's good to have debate. If the other side is so weak and discredited that it's not even effective in having the credibility to have those debates, I think that's a problem for the nation. So I think the Democratic Party needs to fundamentally transform itself and avoid getting into the trap of Luddites, right? These are people, they're not just even anti-Bitcoin, they're anti-technology. So they're anti-Elon Musk. They're anti-electric vehicles now. It's really it's bizarre to see this happening, but I think that it reflects their embrace of a particular kind of Marxist ideology, which is just un-American. And so they had 4 years to foist it onto the country, and I think that it was rejected by the country. But they have to find the pro-Bitcoin politicians to win going forward, and they exist. So I think that there just needs to be more education and more conversations.
Do you think as Trump announced, is now Operation Choke Point 2.0 officially over? It's like that's no longer coming back to Bitcoin?
I think that pendulum could continue to swing. So, for example, we could imagine a scenario where not only do banks help Bitcoin companies transactionally with fiat, banks could also decide that, we're going to lend money against Bitcoin, right? So we'll do Bitcoin secured lending. And then if there's a long bear market and those loans go bad, then you could see a situation where the government says, okay, you lent too much money against Bitcoin, so we're going to have more restrictions around what banks can do with Bitcoin. So I could see things moving back and forth on that aspect of it. I don't think that we'll see a situation where it really is that they will not open a bank account if you are a Bitcoin business that is legal. I think that just won't happen again. Yeah.
So the really hostile things are over, but there can still be here and there hiccups that are normal. How important is it, knowing all of that? How important is it to, as a Bitcoiner, be politically active or be aware of what's going on in the political scheme?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I think we have to be politically active. There's this fantasy that, and in fact, I'll hear Bitcoiners say that we should actually be encouraging the state to ban Bitcoin and to make it illegal. That way, we can all be on the dark market, self-sovereign, and there's no custodians, there's no Wall Street in Bitcoin. And it's, they see that as maximum cypherpunk, right? Of now we've really achieved crypto anarchy because it's illegal to use Bitcoin, and we have to all, fly under the radar. So I see that as dystopian. I see that as hell. I mean, if you get caught, you go to prison because you were using Bitcoin. Like, why is that? Why is that a good thing? That seems terrible. So I think it's very important to be going in the opposite direction of making sure that it is legal to use Bitcoin and that we don't end up in a situation where the government is banning Bitcoin. So when we look at, for example, with gold, people will point to what happened with gold of Executive Order 16102, that the government seized all the gold. And so they use that as an argument for why you should self-custody your Bitcoin. And there's some truth to that. But ultimately, 6102 also applied to people self-custodying their Bitcoin. And so the argument that, oh, well, I brought my Bitcoin and it's not KYC, I have privacy, and so I don't care if the Bitcoin or if the government does 6102 and seizes everyone Bitcoin, they won't get mine. Okay, sure. And then what? And then what do? You just sit on your Bitcoin? You know, like you just buy drugs on the black market with your Bitcoin? That's all you can do. And so it really limits the freedom that you have, right? And we're all here for the freedom. So I think that if we're not politically engaged, we enter into a nihilistic trap of thinking that, because Bitcoin, we don't have to care about politics. I think the opposite is true. I think because of Bitcoin, we should care about politics even more because we can win. Before Bitcoin, there's an argument that you shouldn't care about politics because you can't win. And now I think we can win. And so, and the proof is that we have been winning and that we've been winning far more than I would have ever expected. So for example, on the Bitcoin mining side, the government said all of the Bitcoin miners, this is last year, the government said all the Bitcoin miners have to provide the information about who is selling them electricity. So why did Elizabeth Warren want this information? So that then activists can go to energy companies and say, stop selling electricity to Bitcoin miners. Otherwise we're going to, boycott you or make fun of you for not doing ESG or whatever. So they wanted activists to go cancel the electricity companies that are selling electricity to Bitcoin miners. And so they tried to get all that information through the Department of Energy. So the Department of Energy sent out a survey to all the Bitcoin miners. So we had two options, or let's say three options. One option is to just comply, provide our response of, okay, here's, our energy contractors. The second option would be we don't comply, we break the law, we go to jail for not providing that information. The third option is that we engage in the policy-making process through litigation by suing the government. And so that's what we did. We took the government to court, in federal court. We went in front of a judge and we explained why what they were doing was illegal. And the federal judge agreed with us and told them to knock it off. And so we won in court, right? So we can win by engaging in the process. We don't have to break the law or just simply comply. There's a third option of fighting, and we can win by fighting. So I think that that is why it is so crucial for Bitcoiners to be involved in the political process. We live in democracies, right? They're not perfect, but we're not in communist China where, there's a dictator and if you go and you try to argue against what they're doing, they'll put you in a camp, they'll send you to Siberia. That's not the country we live in. Here in the United States, at least, it's not. And so that's why I think it is important to be involved in politics.
That's super important points. It's also, I would just add to that, because a lot of people say, I don't care about politics. Bitcoin doesn't care about politics. Bitcoin is true. Bitcoin doesn't care themselves of politics, but you are still a human being in a jurisdiction, and politics definitely cares about you. And as long as they, especially if they have monopoly on violence, you don't want to be on the bad side. And I always see politics as kind of the space where we agree on how we live together. So it's from even outside of Bitcoin, it's a natural thing of you want to bring, especially if you feel not well presented, you want to give your input in there. So I think it's very important to give political input as much as possible, but also not be. I mean, there's this thing of like being distracted by politics, but if you put like your fight in there, I think it's a very good thing in general to do. How well do you think we are currently presented in politics with Bitcoin?
Yeah, so this actually ties to something that you just said, which is that this idea that Bitcoin doesn't care about politics. That's actually why it is so powerful in politics, right? So in any kind of negotiation, it comes down to what happens if I walk away. What is in negotiation, they call this the BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And so when we talk about Bitcoin with politicians, and if a politician says, I'm going to ban Bitcoin, then we as Bitcoiners can truthfully respond with, if you do that, all you are doing is banning yourself from Bitcoin, and Bitcoin will thrive abroad in other countries. So you have accomplished nothing. So let's go back to the negotiating table, right? And so it's always the ability to opt out, to walk away, that gives us the leverage to negotiate. If we were desperate and we thought, well, oh no, if they ban Bitcoin, it's over. Bitcoin's dead if they ban Bitcoin. Then we have zero leverage. And then they can actually ban Bitcoin, right? And so that's, I think, the paradox. Now, when it comes to how well is Bitcoin represented in politics, I think that we have a great representation in some regards. In other regards, there's a lot of confusion. And so, there's confusion about Bitcoin versus crypto and all of these tokens and the value of blockchain technology versus the value of Bitcoin. But this is the kind of confusion that can only be addressed by a strategic Bitcoin reserve because it forces that conversation. And when we had that conversation here in the United States, ultimately the result was, okay, we're going to separate strategic Bitcoin reserve and national crypto stockpile. And so that was the result of the negotiation, was that we have, in the United States, at a federal level, separated Bitcoin from crypto. And the executive order said, we're going to buy Bitcoin, we're going to sell crypto. And so I think that in that regard, the confusion has been lifted for now, and that we have a lot of clarity and great representation for Bitcoin.
That's amazing. And I think the separation between Bitcoin and crypto is probably one of the most important things that you can communicate to non-Bitcoiners out there. And in the altcoin space for me is just like companies that want to lobby. How much does that influence the Bitcoin lobbying or the Bitcoin politics, because those central companies maybe can more effectively work or more coordinated work, because like Bitcoin, there's no CEO of Bitcoin, there's no coordinated marketing or like department or stuff like that. How much is that a trend that you're seeing where like Ripple or like other altcoins just have budgets and have teams that they send into politics?
Yeah, so I think that what influences politicians is the intersection of three factors. One is, for any given policy, how many votes do I gain and how many votes do I lose in the next election? Two is, how much money can I fundraise by supporting this issue? And then three, is it good policy? Is it good for the country, right? And so it's along those three axes where you need to have alignment in order to move policy forward. Along those three factors, that the other cryptocurrencies, they can provide the second one, right? Which is they provide lots of funding. And that politicians, they want to have a big war chest. They want to be able to advertise and to get their messaging out. But they don't have the other two. They don't have incremental voters. So as a politician, all you have to do to get the crypto voter is to say that you're pro Bitcoin. That already secures their vote. You don't have to say that you're also pro Cardano, pro XRP, pro Ethereum, pro Solana, right? Like it's already taken care of. The voter has already made the decision. If you say I'm pro Bitcoin, even if they are 100% XRP, they understand that if the politician is pro Bitcoin, that's actually good for XRP from a political perspective. Maybe not from an economic perspective, but from a political one. Because on the other side, you have an anti-Bitcoin politician who is anti-XRP, right? So it's not like there's, I'm going to vote for this guy because, the other guy's pro-Bitcoin, so I'm going to vote for this other politician who's anti-XRP. That doesn't, so, and then on the third part of policy, they understand that good policy is being pro-Bitcoin. So I think that ultimately what the money gets the altcoiners is that they get access, so they get to get their picture taken with a politician. They might have dinner with that politician, and so they can create an appearance of influence, but without the actual influence. And so it's a, maybe that makes sense for them because they're actually there for marketing, right? So they're trying to the reason why they want to take a picture with Donald Trump is so that more people buy XRP, right? It's not even so that they can influence Donald Trump. It's so that they can post the picture on social media and provide the appearance of, oh, we're in a good relationship with the politician, and it doesn't have to be necessarily true. It can, they're just going for the hype.
That's the appearance of it. It's so fascinating, the intersection with Bitcoin politics. Really cool. Would you say that Bitcoin is on the right side or like Republican side currently more? I know in the election there was also like a group of like Harris for Bitcoiners or Bitcoin for Harris or something like that. So there are probably a good amount of Bitcoiners also on the Democrat side, but is Bitcoin currently more on the Republican side?
I think it depends. Within the party apparatus of the actual Republican Party and the Democrat Party, they have what's called a party platform, which is kind of the official views of the political party. And the Republican Party has an official pro-Bitcoin policy plank on their platform. The Democrat Party does not. And so just looking at it objectively with regard to that, I think that it is more Republican today. Now, if we look at it through the lens of, should Democrats have a pro-Bitcoin policy? I think they should. I think it should be bipartisan. I think it should be nonpartisan. And so I think Bitcoin should have universal appeal. It's just that as long as the Democrat Party is controlled by the progressive chartalists who are opposed to currency competition and who want to control the economy and are anti-markets, then it's not going to mix with Bitcoin. What they need to move towards, and I think this is the biggest opportunity for the Democratic Party, is that they need to position themselves as on the Republican side, they are free market. So that means that they're for meme coins, all the cryptos, all of this. On the Democrat Party, what they should say is that they are for consumer protection and that they want to have the actual, utility of crypto without the speculation. And so they are for example, let's say Lightning, right? And they might say that, they want Lightning to be competing with Visa and MasterCard. And so they could find policy directions that they could go in that would actually lean into their strengths of being democratic, of empowering people, of, helping the little guy against the corporation, balancing injustices. And so that's what they should be focused on, rather than saying, oh, we don't like Bitcoin because it's not backed by the government.
Interesting. I like I like to see where Bitcoin is currently going in the political spectrum. It's also interesting because America has basically two parties, and for example, Austria and also like many other countries have like 3, 4, sometimes like 5, and it's super interesting which ones are kind of for Bitcoin and which ones against. And I see always the socialist, green, left parties are usually against it, even though some are like a little bit more open to it, and more the conservative or the economic liberals are a little bit more open to innovation and stuff like that. It's super interesting to observe that. My last question, my last topic for today would be game theory. With America now publicly saying strategic Bitcoin reserve, what is the implication long term for China, South Korea, EU, India, and all of them now seeing that a world superpower like America is now openly talking about strategic Bitcoin reserve and doing that?
I think that it's probably along two lines. One is that they do see Trump as being an unconventional thinker. And so to them, it's probably the case that they want to wait and see if this is just a good idea or not. But on the other hand, I think that the more forward-thinking ones are seeing that it's not just Trump, right? It's Bukele in El Salvador, it's Michael Seyr, it's Bhutan, and that this is how things begin, is they start small. We like to think that Bitcoin's already big because Bitcoin's already like worth more than $1 trillion in market cap. But globally, Bitcoin is still pretty small. So I think that it's still very early over there. But when it breaks through, that they're going to really, go in heavy like everyone else.
Absolutely. That's an interesting one. Also because it was a little bit like, I think Tesla, when they first adopted Bitcoin on the balance sheet, maybe it's similar to that, where Tesla is a huge company. But first they didn't buy that many. I mean, 10,000 Bitcoin is a lot, but it's for Tesla, not that much. And also Elon is always seen as an unconventional guy, as if Amazon or Apple or Microsoft would buy like 10% worth of the balance sheet of Bitcoin. It's a whole different thing. So maybe if the next president, a different one, because Trump, I think, Trump obviously has no second term because he's already his second term. Also does it. Has he cannot, right?
Well, JD Vance, I think, as vice president, is in potentially the best position to continue his policies. And JD Vance is pro Bitcoin. So we could see, for the next 12 years, pro Bitcoin policy in the United States. It's
actually interesting because I've seen the trend that the vice president is then the next president is like, I don't know, is that kind of like informal law in America?
It's very informal. So I expect that there will still be a primary, but usually the president is either the former vice president, the former secretary of state, for example, Hillary Clinton, or the former senator like Barack Obama. And so those are kind of the three areas where we see. But as long as JD Vance does a great job as vice president, and I think that he's off to a great start, I think that he's the favorite.
Absolutely. And I was listening to an interview of him, and I really like this guy. Like JD Vance has a lot of great opinions of him. Like he would be an amazing president, I think. But one question that I asked each and every one of my guests is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Well, I am really into religion. I'm a Catholic myself, so that's it's more important to me than Bitcoin is, and that's so my faith is the other thing other than Bitcoin.
Really cool. We have a endotin in the podcast. By the way, it's fascinating how often religion comes up at that question. We have an endotin in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. It's a question you can interpret it as you want. The question for you is, how many years do you think Bitcoin will run for?
Wow. So I will interpret it as, first of all, Bitcoin has been running since Hal Finney tweeted running Bitcoin back in 2009. And so, we're into a 16-year bull market. And I think that this bull market will continue forever. I mean, that's, when we think about the productivity of humanity combined with the people, it's going to take a really long time for people to get to that 100% allocation, right? Bitcoin maxis were like, yeah, we're all in, we sold our shares. So we're 100%. If we look at the wider world, we're at like less than 0.01% of global wealth, if you include all assets, and that all assets is going to continue to grow. And so, while Bitcoin's growing, the whole economy is growing as well. So I think that when we're trying to figure out what's the price of Bitcoin going to be, at the very, we're going to get to a point where it's like one Bitcoin equals one sat equals one Satoshi, right? Where that's $100 million per Bitcoin. And that's going to take many, many decades to get there, but I think it will happen.
I love that. Really cool. We're in. It's also usually my answer if someone asks me if this cycle is a super cycle, I'm like, yeah, we are in a super cycle since 2009.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
Really cool. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yeah. So, my next question for your next guest is, what are your 12 seed words? So you can find me at Bitcoin Pierre on Twitter, or Pierre Rochard on LinkedIn, and just double check to make sure it's not an impersonator.
Yeah, always double check for the blue check mark, or like even sometimes they have the blue check mark. I saw some other Robin with a blue check mark, which was really frightening for me. Yeah. But what are your 12 seed words? I will ask them.
I do 24. Yeah.
I can give you the first 12.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on. It was a lot of fun, and it was also really informative. I think it was a great episode. Thank you so much also for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.